Okay, good morning, everybody. It's really fantastic to be here, and what a great group and what a great conference. So I am going to answer one question today, I hope. It's a question that many of us have asked ourselves. I'm sure you'll recognize it. The question I'm going to try to answer is, does my dog really love me, or does she just want a treat? Now, I think that simply by looking at their sweet faces, we can easily tell that they obviously really love us, and that it's easy to see just by looking at them what's going on in their furry little heads, right? Or maybe it's not so easy to see. Maybe that's not quite right. But something's going on. You can't tell me nothing's going on. And why is the question about them, whether they love us? Do you love me is not a question about you. That's not a question about them. I needed a different question. And the question I came up with is, who are you? That's a very different question than do you love me? That's a question about you. Now, there are capacities of the human mind. We know these capacities, we have them. Are these capacities of only the human mind? What are these other big brains that share our planet doing with what's inside their heads? Scientists, some scientists, have told us for a long time that nothing is going on. In these giant brains, is this possible? And they've told us that you cannot find a way in, that it's not scientific because it's unanswerable. That might have been true 60 years ago, but it's not true now. There are at least 3 very good ways in. You can look at brains, you can consider evolution, and you can observe behavior. This is a famous elephant scientist, Joyce Poole. That's not an elephant, but that is the first animal in the world that had neurons. Jellyfish were the first ones with nerve cells. And then jellyfish gave rise to chordates. Chordates gave rise to vertebrates, which came out of the water and had conferences on animals and sustainability and things that we need to know about. But it's still true that a nerve cell is a nerve cell, whether it's in a jellyfish or a chimpanzee or your daughter or a crayfish. It's still a nerve cell. So what does that tell us about the emotional and cognitive lives of something like a crayfish? Well, not much. It tells us very little. But it turns out that if you give crayfish in tanks little electrical shocks every time they try to come out to look for food, they will develop what looks like an anxiety disorder. They will stop foraging and kind of shut down and seem depressed, as though they're frightened. If you put the same chemical in the water used to treat anxiety disorder in humans, they relax and they come out again. Now, how do we consider the possibility for anxiety in crayfish? Mostly we boil them by the thousands. Octopuses are mollusks, but they recognize human faces and they use tools as well as do most apes. How do we honor the ape-like intelligence of this mollusk? Mostly we boil them by the thousands. On reefs there are fish called groupers. Sometimes groupers chase fish into crevices in coral or rocks, and when they do that, the grouper sometimes goes to where it knows a moray eel is sleeping. It has a way of signaling to the moray, "Follow me." The moray understands that signal, and then it says to the moray, "It's right here," and the moray goes in. Sometimes the moray catches the fish, sometimes the fish bolts, and the grouper gets it. This is an ancient partnership. It's probably been going on for millions of years, and we've known about it for about 15 years. And when I say we, I mean the 17 people who read that paper. How do we honor this ancient partnership? Mostly fried this time. Now, a pattern is developing, and this pattern is saying more about us, unfortunately, than it says about them. Teaching is when you take time away from what you are doing to show a companion or a child how to do something. Humans do a lot of teaching. Chimpanzees, interestingly, do not teach, but sea otters teach. And killer whales do a lot of teaching. Some of their teaching takes several years to complete about certain involved hunting techniques, and killer whales share all of the food that they catch. If you look at the human brain compared to a mouse brain, if you consider evolution, what you see is that the human brain is an elaboration on the basic mammalian brain. And this is how evolution works. It doesn't just come up with something totally new. It takes the parts that are in stock and on the shelf, and then it fabricates some new twist. So that's a human brain compared to a mouse, and you can see that the human brain is basically a very large chimpanzee brain. Now, it's a good thing that we have the biggest because we are the most insecure of all of the apes. But, uh-oh, that's a dolphin. Does this tell us anything about how dolphins think or feel? It might. It might not. We can see brains, but we can't see minds, and yet we can see the workings of minds in the logic of behaviors. And so, we make sense of this exactly how the elephants themselves make sense of it. We can see exactly what choice they have made. They have chosen a cool spot in the shade of the palm trees to let their babies go to sleep. While the big ones do not sleep, they rest and they doze, but they stand vigilant, facing out and touching one another. How is it that our minds make sense of this exactly as their minds do? Why would we choose exactly how they've chosen? Because for a very long time, under the arc of the same sun, listening to the same roars and whoops of the same enemies, we became who we are, and they became who they are. And we've been neighbors for a very long time. These elephants do not look relaxed, and they're not. They look concerned. What are they concerned about? Well, it turns out that if elephants hear the voices of tourists, they ignore tourists. They ignore people speaking English because people speaking English don't bother elephants, usually. But when they hear Maasai voices, they bunch up and they run away because the Maasai carry spears and get into confrontations with elephants at waterholes and sometimes hurt them. Elephants know not only that there are different kinds of animals and some are human, they know there are different kinds of humans and some are okay and some are dangerous. They know us better than we know them. They've been watching us more carefully for a long time. We look different on the outside, but our imperatives are the same. Try to stay alive, find food, keep our babies alive. Under the skin, we are almost identical. Same skeleton, same organs. Whether we are outfitted for hiking in the hills of Africa or for diving under the ocean, mammals are basically the same. In the flippers of killer whales and all cetaceans, there are the same finger bones that I'm holding up right here. And In addition to having almost identical nervous systems, we have the same hormones and the same chemicals that create mood and motivation in human brains and minds are in their nervous systems and their brains and their minds as well. And so you see things like helping where help is needed, curiosity, especially in the young, the deep bonds of family affection. Affection is affection. Dancing is dancing. It is what it looks like. And then we ask a really weird question. Are they even conscious? Well, when you get general anesthesia, what do you become? Unconscious. It means you are disconnected from the sensory input of your sensory organs. To ask this question of animals who have eyes that can see, noses that can smell, ears that can hear, and who play with each other is a very weird question to ask. Why are we still asking it? Because it reinforces our favorite story. What's our favorite story? That we are special and that we are the best, that we're the only ones. People say empathy is the thing that makes us human. But actually, empathy is just the ability of your mind to match the mood of your companions. That's empathy. All animals that live in groups need empathy because when it's time to hurry up, you better hurry up. If all of your companions suddenly startle and fly away, it does not pay for you to stand there and say, gee, I wonder why everybody just left. That's not going to work. I think there are sort of three realms of empathy in a way. They're just an intensification. One is the basic empathy I just talked about, basic mood matching. The other, at a slight distance, sympathy. I'm sorry to hear your grandmother has passed away. I don't feel the same grief, but I understand that grief. If you are moved to do something about it, that's what I call compassion. Acting on sympathy is compassion. Human empathy is not the thing that makes us human. In fact, it's very, very far from being perfect. We take empathic animals, we round them up, we kill them, and we eat them. And if you don't think that's a great example, then all I can say is we don't treat each other too great either. People who know one thing about animal behavior seem to know this one very awkward technical term, anthropomorphism. They know that you're not allowed to attribute any thoughts or emotions that humans have to non-human beings. But why is that? It's not scientific to say they're hungry when they're looking for food, to say they're tired when their tongues are hanging out, and then when they're playing with their children and having a good time, to say, I wonder if they know anything at all, I wonder if they're even conscious. That's not scientific. We tell that to ourselves to reinforce our favorite story that we are the special ones. So I was talking to a reporter who said, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but how do you really know that other animals can really think and really feel? And I was racking my brain for the best published example, and then I realized the answer was right there on the carpet. When my puppy comes over to me and rolls over on her back, now she does not get up off the carpet and go to the dining room table and roll over on her back. She comes to me. And why does she do that? Because she's just had a thought. The thought is, I would like my belly rubbed. I'm going to go to him because we are family. I trust him completely, and I know that when I roll over on my back, he knows what I'm asking, and he knows how to get the job done and make it feel good. She has thought, she has felt. It's not too much more complicated than that, really. We see wild animals. We say, oh, look, there's elephants, there's killer whales, there's wolves. We put a label on them, and then we roll on. That's not how they see each other. That tall-finned male, these are all members of the L pod off Washington State and British Columbia. That tall-finned male was 36 years old when I took that picture. That female next to him is his cousin. She was 44. They've known each other for decades. They have traveled many thousands of miles together. When they are miles apart in the ocean, they hear each other and they know who is who. They know who they're with. They know where they are. They know who their enemies are. They know who their friends and family are. They have lives. This is an elephant named Philo in Kenya in the Samburu Reserve. This is Philo 4 days later. Humans are not only capable of feeling grief, we generate an incredible amount of it. We want to carve their teeth. Why can't we wait for them to die? Elephants once occupied Africa from the Mediterranean to the Cape of Good Hope. Now they live in little disconnected shards, and we are grinding those shards smaller and smaller all the time. Of course, in the United States, where I come from, we take much better care of our wildlife. In our most famous park, we paid the park rangers to completely exterminate the wolves, some of the last wolves that were living south of the Canadian border. That worked. They got rid of all of them. 60 years later, everything was so out of whack that they brought wolves back to try to bring the elk and the deer back under control. People spend $30 million every year coming to Yellowstone just to see the wolves. And in 2012, somebody in our Congress highlighted the word wolf on the Endangered Species Act and hit the delete key. And they went from being totally protected to completely unprotected once they put one paw outside that park. And so this very well-known wolf family got 2 of its adults killed just a couple of months after that happened. Immediately, the younger wolves started to fight. The siblings started to fight with each other. One of the most precocious females was kicked out of her family by her sisters. The father was wandering around trying to find his mate and his brother. He lost his territory, his family, and his hunting support going into winter. I thought she would be okay and he was doomed. Instead, what happened was she was shot starving at a chicken coop and he stayed alive for several years. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's still alive right now. He was alive a couple of months ago. The reason I'm telling you these details is sometimes the consequences of killing animals are bigger for the ones that survive, because the trajectory of their whole life can change because they have lives. They're not just numbers. We cause them so much pain that I often wonder why it is that they don't hurt us more than we hurt them. Killer whales have never hurt a human being in the wild. And yet, this one had just finished eating part of a gray whale that he and his companions had killed. But those people in the boat had nothing at all to fear from him. This whale, T20, he's about 50 years old. He had just finished tearing a seal into 3 pieces. I watched. These people had nothing to fear, even though each of those people weigh about the same as the seal he had just eaten. They eat seals. Why don't they eat us? Why can we trust them around our toddlers? Why is it that 2 different scientists in 2 different countries have stories of being lost in the fog and being taken to their houses on the shore by killer whales? In the Bahamas, there's a scientist named Denise Herzing. She's been studying spotted dolphins for 30 years. She knows about 100 of them by name. They know her. They recognize her boat. They show up when she arrives. One day she got there, and they wouldn't come near the boat. She said, "What's wrong?" Somebody came out from underneath to announce that a person on board had just died during a nap in his bunk. Now, why would the dolphins know that one of the human hearts had stopped? Why would that spook them? They left, of course, to take the man and do the sad business that they had to do. When they came back a few days later, the dolphins all came to the boat as usual. What is the answer to all of these questions of why they do all these things? I don't know, but I know what it means. It means there's a lot more going on in the other minds that share our planet than we ever suspect. In South Africa, there was a baby dolphin named Dolly. She was nursing age. One of the keepers at an aquarium where she was living was watching her through the window one day, smoking a cigarette. She went over to her mother and nursed for a moment or two, came back to the window and released all the milk so that it encircled her head like smoke. Now, when human beings use one thing to represent something else, we call that art. The things that make us human are not the things we tell ourselves are the things that make us human. We're not really that different in our major components. They all do things we do. We do things they do. What I think makes us human is that we are the most extreme of all the animals. We are the most creative and the most compassionate and the most destructive and the cruelest animal that has ever lived. That's us. We are all of those things together. But we are not the only ones who love each other. We're not the only ones who care for our mates or for our children. Albatrosses fly sometimes for a month to go 8,000 miles to bring back one meal for their chicks. They live on the most remote islands in the oceans. We don't even know that they're there, but boy, do they know we're there. Because this is Laysan in the middle of the Pacific, and that's what it looks like. And now what do they feed their children after flying for a month, 8,000 miles? Plastic screw tops to plastic jars. They are all full of plastic. It doesn't always kill them, although it never helps any of them. This one was almost ready to fledge and died, and was packed with red cigarette lighters. This is not the relationship we are supposed to have with the rest of the living world. But it's the relationship we do have, because we named ourselves after our minds, and we don't think about the consequences of what we do. But when we expect new human life in the world, what do we paint on the walls of the nurseries? We paint animals. We don't paint cell phones. We don't paint work cubicles. We paint animals. We don't even realize why. Why do we paint animals? Because we have this unconscious blessing ready for our new babies, and that is, welcome to this beautiful living world. We are not alone. We have company. But every one of those animals, every animal in every painting of Noah's Ark deemed worthy of salvation by the Creator is in mortal danger now, and their flood is us. We are too much of a good thing. And the only thing that has ever been proven to help the human population trend, the crisis, the trajectory that we're on, is equal rights for women, citizenship for every human being. And we started with a question. The question was, do they love us? And we're going to end by turning that question around and asking, rather simply, are we capable of loving them enough to simply have them continue to exist?
Bravo. Fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Very, very good.
Thank you.
Very good. Well done, Carlos.